Okay, great. Looks like we're ready to start the meeting. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the September Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission meeting. So just for some housekeeping, although this is a virtual meeting, it is still a formal meeting of Hackney Council, and all the usual constitutional requirements of council meetings apply. I would like to remind members and officers present that this meeting is being held in public and is being broadcast live via the internet. The rights of the press and public to record and film the meeting will continue to apply, and representatives may be in attendance or viewing the live stream. Just a few points to remember in terms of operability. Unless you are speaking, please keep your mic muted. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand or indicate in the chat section to get my attention. Keeping your camera on helps me to identify who would like to speak. Right, thank you for your patience. We're going to formally start the meeting now. So item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence or lateness?
Just Councillor Hanson, apologies for lateness. She'll be joining the meeting later.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on to item 2, urgent items. There are no urgent items and the order of business is as set out in the agenda. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Peters.
I am a governor of the Garden School in Hackney.
Okay, Joe.
I'm a governor at Sir Thomas Hackney School.
Sorry, do I have anybody else?
Yeah, me. I'm a teacher and also NEU member.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Justine, I'm head teacher at Our Ladies.
Parent governor at Sir Thomas Hackney.
Great. Any others? No. Okay. In which case, moving on to item 4, update on school examinations 2020. Can I please ask that you turn to page 1 of the agenda pack? Members will be aware that there has been much confusion and controversy in relation to the awarding of examination results at both A-level and GCSE this summer. The Director of Education has been asked to update the Commission on this situation, in particular, how this has impacted on young people locally, the range of advice and support available to help young people navigate post-16, 18 options, and an assessment of local post-16 and 18 options and capacity, and whether these meet local needs. In attendance, we have Annie Gammon, the Director of Education, and Anton Francic, the Senior Secondary School Advisor. We have 25 minutes for this item, so can I ask Annie to give a 5 to 10 minute verbal update, and we can have questions afterwards. Handing over to you, Annie.
Thank you, Councillor Conway. I think Councillor Bramble might want to say a few words to start with, and then I think she can hand directly to Anton, and Anton and I will answer questions between us. Over to you, Councillor Bramble.
Thank you, Annie. Yes, as you know, as you quite rightly pointed out, Councillor Conway, there was a real concern around how A-levels were going to be assessed, and children from disadvantaged background were disproportionately affected by the algorithm. Myself and the Mayor were concerned about this and were part of the people that wrote to the government on this issue. Thankfully, the government did U-turn, and now teachers' assessments are the grades that young people got. But in the interim, what that did cause is a lot of uncertainty, due stress for children and young people that really could have been avoided. There are no league tables going to be published this year, but if we were looking at league tables, I just want to reassure you that Hackney would have fared really well, and we have more young people applying to go to sixth form in the borough this year, and also our results were very good in terms of the results that young people got. I think that it's important to thank all the staff. I know that we've got a head teacher on the line, all the staff that helped and support our families to navigate that very difficult time, and thank the young people themselves, because it has been a very difficult time. The last thing that I would say, because of those proved results, it then allowed our children and young people to go on to more positive pathway, whether it's university, internship, apprenticeships, or straight on to work. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you. And I'm going to show a presentation which Anton will talk to. We should be able to coordinate this reasonably, and then we'll take the presentation off for the questions.
Okay, hello everyone, and thanks to Councillor Bramble. That was an excellent summary, and that's first slide is just a reminder. I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Bramble said, but that's just really a reminder of the context. And onto the next slide. And in terms of the summer, we were there on the day, on the results days at A-level and GCSE, and we know that on the 13th, on that day, with the A-level results coming out, it led to more significant inconsistencies in the outcomes than could be resolved. And by the 17th, that's 3 days before the GCSEs were to be released, there was a U-turn, and the Ofqual and the DFE announced a move to teacher assessment, and as a result of that U-turn, teacher assessment, centre assessed grades became the marker. And as Councillor Bramble said, we're very pleased with the results. Before I go on to the GCSEs, I'll show those in slightly more detail. At A-level, our A star to C as a borough reached 87% compared with 74% last year, and that's above the national this year. And the increase we saw in Hackney is larger than the increase seen nationally. And overall, there's improvement in the results, and there were notable rises at the high grades, A star B, A star C. We're very pleased with the schools who did a fantastic job in dealing with COVID and responding to lockdown and moving swiftly to a new system of teacher assessment. So on to the GCSEs. Okay, this will show you a timeline, so you can see Hackney's performance. So in the upper table, that's a strong pass in the combined measure of English and mathematics. And just a precursor here, this is internal use only, and this is not about accountability, but of course we and our schools like to know how well we've done compared with how previously we've done. Overall, the strong pass in the combined English and maths is up, which you can see there, up to 54%. And similarly, at the standard pass, that's up. And those improvements, whilst they're in line with national trends, at individual school level, we're seeing improvements greater than being seen nationally. So as an example, in the basics measure, strong pass and standard pass, Hackney is performing above last year's national averages. 71% of our students achieved a strong pass in English, and 58% achieved a strong pass in mathematics only. That's more than half the students got a strong pass in mathematics. At standard pass, again, high proportions, much higher last year. 86% of students achieved a grade 4 or above, standard pass in English on its own, and in mathematics it was 77%. Those are either above the national or with maths in line with the 2020 national.
for us to unpick. So the statement that was included as background in the pack was a statement from the 13th of August, which is results day from Ofqual. Subsequently, there was a statement on the 17th of August from the chair, and then a further statement on the 2nd of September. Now, on the overall picture seems to be, well, certainly on the 2nd of September statement, there was Ofqual said that they had advised the Secretary of State in March that it was most appropriate to organise physical, socially distanced exams. The earlier statement from the 13th of August seems to suggest that that wouldn't be possible, and in part that was because the government seemed to want to get children back to school, and indeed there was an abortive attempt to do that en masse. So the questions really that I have are, what involvement or visibility did we have as a local education authority in that discussion, in that deliberation? Would physical exams actually have been possible? And there was a suggestion as well that even if physical exams were possible, that because the decision was taken so late not to have physical exams, there wasn't time to create a robust system of standardization. And then, very last thing, were students in Hackney, did they have their university places? Were they prejudiced in terms of their university places, and what happened in the end there? That's a slightly many-headed question, and I apologise for that, Chair. I somewhat taken.
I know that's it. And actually on that the last point that you made, Councillor Peters, anecdotally, given that I have a daughter in year 13, I've managed to hear from quite a few of her friends what their experiences were. I heard of quite a few young people who were rejected from their first choice universities based on the algorithm, despite the fact that the predicted grades would have met the requirements that the universities had asked for. So, yeah, just to substantiate that question that you'd asked in relation to the universities. Can I get a question from Councillor Potter, and then we'll go to answers, please.
My question is about the kind of standardisation across schools, in the sense that I had a conversation with a senior member of staff in one particular secondary school, which I won't name, and they described the rigour with how they'd approached doing the teacher assessments, with a greater reliance on, teacher assessment for grading. How confident are you that this was to a similar standard across Hackney schools? My other question is, if it's apparent that the grades that have been awarded this year are unusually slightly higher on average, are we kind of thinking and planning for supporting students next year in how we talk to them, how we approach, and whatever happens in terms of whether they sit formal exams or perhaps go through a similar kind of experience, that we're thinking about what their experience is actually going to be like, and how they, compare that to this year's results. Sorry, that's a bit garbled, but I hope that makes sense.
Okay, I'm going to kick off. I'm going to kind of invite Annie first. I'm going to follow, and then we'll probably box and cox to do our best to blend your questions and come up with a response.
Yeah. So perhaps if I talk about the national picture, which you've described well about the issues that there were. I think the fact that 3 options were considered by the government really only emerged after the results came out. And I did think, when they said they thought about doing exams, I thought that would have been really hard. So I don't think any of the options were good, but I don't think they carried out the option they chose, which was to sort of predict the grades. worked well. I don't think they made it work as well as it could have done. I was certainly very angry when I found out that the teacher grades had been ignored completely over that weekend before they made the U-turn, that they had completely ignored the teacher grades and used an algorithm based on prior attainment. I think I wasn't the only one, and indeed, as Councillor Bramble said, a very firm letter was written by Councillor Bramble and the Mayor, and indeed the government U-turn. So actually I think that did take the pressure off the GCSE day, because we knew that those centre assessed grades would come through. So I think it would have been difficult to have exams in place. So I think I'm going to hand over to Anton for the other parts of the question.
Okay, I'm just going to go back a little bit, because whilst I recognise in our secondary schools we've got 9 academies, 6 main, we very much kind of have a kind of take the Hackney picture here. So we see it, you know, as our kind of professional responsibility to pass on the guidance and to support schools interpreting that guidance, which we did by producing our own advice regarding how to approach teacher assessment and the business of centre assessed grades. So to that end, we're confident that aspects such as bias and cultural responsiveness, we prepared a paper and shared that with heads and shared that with subject leaders at their subject network meetings and sixth form coordinators. So the messages we wanted as an authority, I know, reached out to all schools, whether they were maintained or not maintained. I think this week the government has produced updated guidance on the business concerning examinations in autumn, i.e. next month, October, and in spring 2021. So we summarise that and decipher some of that, but we also allow, through the virtual meetings that we hold, either with the director or with the secondary heads or with the sixth form, post-16 leaders, deeper dialogue about how to interpret the government guidance. And the guidance that came out this week is about changes, is about additional costs for hiring venues, invigilators. So we kind of very much want to facilitate access to that advice. We were there on the results days, and we know how disappointed the teachers were and how disappointed the students were, deeply disappointed. And it's terrible when there's like a fait accompli and the universities have made their decisions, and you know, essentially there's a big slice of the audience of the young people here that have been given a gap year that they didn't plan for. And you know, so we're not just simply expressing sympathy, we're kind of working with those schools at identifying what options they've got available for them. And as you can imagine, as you described already, it's not easy, because it's it continues to be fluid and uncertain. So we work with each school, and we try and work with those schools with each student to secure the best for them. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have 2 more questions. So we've got Councillor Patrick and then Councillor Etty. Councillor Patrick?
Yeah, thank you. Did any, I know when the original off-call results come out, some young people got no pass, who expected to get quite good grades, got a no pass. After the grades were reassessed by the teachers, did any young people get a no pass at all? What are schools perhaps doing to support young people who are not happy with their grades and want to retake in October? And do you know what? I mean, the government committed some money for tutoring and to help young people catch up. Obviously, some young people are much further behind than others who, I know we're going to talk later about digital divide, but we do know that some young people didn't really get much schooling during lockdown, and what we're going to do to make sure that those young people, whether they're taking GCSEs next year, A-levels, or just non-academic, exam students catch up to make sure that they're at the same level as their peers who did have better access to education down lockdown. I'm extremely worried about what's going to happen next year across the board. I mean, in the sense that because so many pupils have had so little education, I think even those, I seem to remember reading somewhere, even those who'd had the best education only had about 2/3 of, at the best, of what they would have received if they'd been at school. So everybody is probably going to be disadvantaged, and how schools are going to work with those young people to help them gain what the grades that they should get and the education they should get.
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Councillor Etty, and then I think that will be the end of the questions for this item.
Yeah, I think that you know, head teachers have been.
Sorry, Annie. Can we just get the question from Councillor Etty first?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Councillor Claire Potter has actually asked the question and is in part with what Councillor Patrick has asked. So I'm fine, Past Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go first this time, then Annie can follow. Just to kind of go back to the first of the two questions, which I actually thought had the ingredients of going forward. So we've advised and schools with the appeals process, although that's an unknown, and if students are not happy with their grade, there's the appeal, but you can only appeal if you felt you were prejudiced against, and you can't appeal against the school. And the details of the that we're doing is supporting heads and subject leaders with the retaking of exams, as you said there, Councillor Patrick, in the autumn term in October. And there's the tutoring, there's the catch-up. We've been involved in working with schools at looking at lost learning and missed learning. Some of our schools, for those students, the current year 11s and 13s, we're looking, the current year 10s, we're looking at and used summer camps as an opportunity to help make up for some of that missed learning. Going forward, there's a continuing conversation that is about looking at what does it mean for every school to provide effective blended learning, and that's looking at the skill set of the staff, the digital devices, the learning modes that suit their students best, and devising that mix of immersive learning, online learning, remote learning that suits their schools best. That's something that individual schools with guidance need to kind of work out at the moment. Immediately after lockdown in March and April, you saw a lot of delivery being shifted online, and it's just interesting the feedback from the Lost Learning project that Hackney was involved in. She kind of spoke about engagement and take-up of online learning, and it varied. It varied across schools as it varied across the country. So it's an area that we want to look at, online learning and blended learning properly with schools. And I should say there's also, I think you've already mentioned this, I'm not going to restate all of it, is the national tutoring programme. So we're doing what we can to make sure that schools are aware of what provisions, additional provisions are there, and what existing provisions, such as adjusting their timetables and the curriculum content, can also take place to better support the current the current Key Stage 4 and year 12s. Okay, thank you.
So, Anton,
I didn't get I noticed, unless I missed it, I did ask whether any young person got a foul, or whatever you want to call it, a U, or because there was I remember seeing on the news, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily in Hackney, that young people that were predicted to get B's and C's were failing their A levels on the algorithms because too many people had passed?
On the algorithm, I know from the day when we were in schools, at A-level, for example, some students who were teacher assessed predicted to get B's and A's came out with D's. And I know similarly in other schools that we visited on GCSE day that some students who were assessed by the teachers as being on track for a grade 7 or 8, with the algorithm gave those students a grade 4. So all this has now changed with the teacher assessment grades now being the final grade. So we're relieved, but that isn't that doesn't mean that people weren't upset and affected and deeply distressed with it. I can't answer the question about individual failures. I know at post-16 this year 100% of A-level students passed. Last year it was 98%. So there's something to be said there, and I think that's probably the best answer I can offer to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anton. I just had one last question actually about, you mentioned that we don't have information from the DfE about different ethnic groups and gender.
Disadvantage, yeah.
Oh, is it likely that we going to get that?
I don't know. I don't know what to expect. When I talk with our stats and research team, they don't know, and it's because, apart from the fluidity, it's because we had the statement right at the beginning that there'd be no performance table. So we don't know. We can ask for it, and I got no idea what to. Sorry, go on.
Right. Can we not get a picture of that from the schools? Is there no way of us being able to determine that at a local level? Because I think many of the questions that many of us wanted to ask related to those, to that information, essentially, to get a sense of, for example, whether what the Youth Parliament representatives mentioned in a previous meeting about their concerns about unconscious bias, we don't quite have a sense at the moment about, whether or not some groups have been or haven't been disadvantaged or advantaged as a result of this, grading system that's been used for this year.
The plan for that was to pick up that intelligence when the school improvement partners make their visits. We wanted to not demand centre assessed data last term just because the situation was completely unknown. But when we collected the on the day results, we gave some qualitative questions to heads, which were about how the algorithm played out. And so that information has come back descriptively, and we want the conversation with the school improvement partners to drill into that. We wanted schools to kind of get prepared for the restart and the reopening, and be pushing for data that we weren't certain was going to be provided by the DfE. So it's very much kind of looking at the school improvement partner.
It seems as though, in terms of what we should do in relation to this item going forward, it seems to me that it would be really good if we could have an update on that, and if we can continue this conversation once we do have a better picture of what that looks like, and hopefully by that stage we'll have a sense of how many young people have attempted to retake or to challenge their grades. I think we'll have a better idea of that situation then. So yes, if we can perhaps follow up with that at a later stage.
Thank you. Noted, accepted. Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to probably move on to the next item now. Sorry, I'm just having some technical issues. Bear with me. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to item 5, which is COVID-19 service briefings. Sorry, I'd just like to thank you again, Anton and Annie, for your contributions, and Antoinette in the previous item. Item 5, COVID-19 briefings. Can I ask members to turn to page 3 of the agenda pack? There are 2 COVID-19 updates for the Commission from the Children and Families Service at page 5 and Hackney Learning Trust at page 9. We have 25 minutes for this item, so can I ask the directors to briefly identify key issues from the reports that the Commission should be made aware of, and then we can have a short question and answer afterwards. So handing over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether Councillor Bramble doesn't want to say a few words first.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, Chair, just a few things in preparing for children to go back to school that we have been working with schools around how we get children back to school swiftly and safely, and reassuring parents around that. So there's lots of work that's been going on in schools and any settings that have children in them. We've had a real big focus on health and well-being and thinking about how we support children and young people in that. I must say, while initially we were all talking about the pandemic, for me, I'm always concerned about delayed trauma and delayed triggers on what that might mean. So it's really important that that message continues to go out to school. We've had lots of bespoke tailored programs around health and well-being as we've grown through the response to the pandemic. We've had an extensive program for children and young people in our youth hubs outside where it's safe to do so, and an online offer, and the take up on that was good. And although it wasn't extensive as last time, I'm really proud of what staff and the voluntary sector have helped to provide around that. And I'm sure most of you know that, you know, Councillor Woodley has been doing some good work, and all of the children's centres and our adventure playgrounds were open and had lots of children coming in to use them, which is a really positive thing, given, you know, just hearing children going to school has been a really nice thing this time to hear, Chair. So yeah, I'll hand over to Sarah. Oh, one thing I have to say as well, decrease in referrals when children weren't in school, we expected increase. So Sarah has been talking to our finance department, and we've had conversations about how we respond to what we suspect will see an increase in referrals to the system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bramble. We submitted a paper which is already a few weeks out of date, as these things go. But I think, as Councillor Bramble has indicated, really, you know, some of our key trends have continued, so that much lower rate of referrals into the system than we're used to having. So overall down about 38%. As Councillor Bramble has said there, we are kind of preparing ourselves for an increase as schools go back. Obviously, there's been a sort of gradual increase in the number of children going back into schools over the last week. We haven't yet seen an increase. So we kind of had anticipated the increase might start last week. It hasn't started to show through just yet, but we are monitoring the numbers coming in on a daily basis at the moment, just so that we're ready to respond and understand what the impact on our system might be. We have got additional staff in place that were brought in earlier in the year when we had a significant increase in referrals towards the end of last year and into the early part of this year. And we've been able to maintain that staffing. So they've been kind of working through some of the cases that were already in the system, but also helping out with some of the cases that haven't been moving through the system quite so swiftly. But those staff are now able to pick up any referrals that are coming through. So when I talk about cases that aren't moving through the system quite so swiftly, there's a section in the report here which just talks about some of the increases we're seeing within the system. So our numbers of children on child protection plans has gone up quite significantly. So actually, you know, in this report we're talking about 277. As of today, we're on 288. So that's more than a 10% increase in the number of children on child protection plans. But that's largely made up not of children going on to child protection plans, but children that we aren't managing to get off child protection plans because it's very difficult to do the intervention in the current climate. So some of those things that we would normally be doing to help families to move and to make changes have just been quite difficult to deliver through this period. Similarly, we've got an increase in the number of cases within the court system and within our pre-court system, largely again because we're not managing to get some of the work done that needs to be done for courts. So some of the assessments that we would normally need to do for courts, and we're not able to do those because we're not able to have face-to-face contact, or we haven't been able to, or some of the agencies that we commission pieces of work from aren't able to do those pieces of work just at the moment, although that's starting to move now. So we're starting to see more movement through the system as things pick up, as we're doing more face-to-face work. We've also got more children in the looked after children system. So it was 449 when we did this report. It's 456 today, which is, really very high for us. Some of those are unaccompanied asylum seekers, so we're seeing more unaccompanied asylum seekers coming in at the moment, but some of them are also adolescents where there's been a kind of breakdown in family relationships, and we're trying to work towards resolving those. And some cases where children would normally have gone through a court process and would be at the end of a court process, so they'd be coming out and be made subject to what we call permanency orders, so things like special guardianship orders. They're actually stuck in the court system, so they're still looked after. So there's kind of blockages at various points through the system. And we're anticipating that the next few months are going to be quite busy as those blockages start to release. In terms of domestic abuse, I think I've reported here on several occasions about the increase in domestic abuse referrals. That had gone down a little bit, or sort of plateaued back to normal levels. It was up again last week. We don't particularly know why. It's looking a bit flatter this week. So we're just continuing to monitor that, really. We've made some changes in our practice over the last few weeks as lockdown has eased. So we're out doing a lot more face-to-face visits now. We're still doing some blend in that, but our highest risk cases we're going out and doing regular face-to-face visits. With some of the lower risk cases, we're doing a mix of face-to-face and virtual work still, just as we're waiting for more capacity to come into the system. There are some challenges for us in terms of space within the estate. So just having space for people to come and grab a desk at the moment when they're between visits it is, I think, an emerging challenge for us. Our facilities have given us 21 desks in the town hall and 25 in Hackney Service Centre at the moment, while they're renewing some of the facilities in the service centre. But I think they're very aware that we do need more space. Similarly to in children's social care, our youth offending teams, the work is now starting to flow through again. So the courts were not really operating fully for some time, but they have reopened in July. And we're seeing a lot more cases that had been kind of building up, waiting to be heard, now going through the courts. So an increase in activity there. And with that, an increase in young people who are on remand at the moment. Councillor Bramble mentioned some of the summer activities. It's been a very busy time for us over the summer. I think it's gone really successfully with some great planning that went in, both in Young Hackney and with our voluntary and community sector partners and with the housing department. So just making sure that we had those activities in place for young people. So our youth hubs have been busy. The open spaces, so some of the sports provision and the adventure playgrounds have been particularly busy and very popular over the summer period. I can give a bit of an update on the figures that we've had through the youth hubs and some of our Young Hackney provision. So we had 680 children and young people accessing provision, and 3,146 attendances within our own provision. But then we've had another about 20 providers within the voluntary and community sector also providing, and we're just waiting for some of that data to come through. But I think it's been really positive that we've managed to get young people engaged in some activities over the summer. The digital devices that eventually came through from the DFE, I have to say they came through very late, really right at the end of last term. We've been working with HLT to get those out. The Learning Trust did a lot of the work on that, so good piece of partnership work really. But most of those computers that we've got for children who have social workers have now been distributed, and we've got some more that we can now give out as well. And then really the other key activity has been working with our colleagues in the Learning Trust to try and support children back into school. We know those that are receiving support through social care or through Young Hackney, through some of our early help provision, are probably going to be some of the children that are going to struggle most with the transition back into school. So we've been asking our practitioners to really work with families and with young people over the summer to help them prepare for the return. And we're now working closely with our partners in the Learning Trust to track what the attendance is like and make sure there's a joint communication with schools and social workers. So that's kind of my update. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So we are running behind schedule, so I'm going to ask if we can be very brief with our questions and if we can stick to one question each, please. So I have seen Louisa and Councillor Etty. If there's anybody else, can you indicate in the chat function? Councillor Peters, I can see you waving your hand. Okay, can we take two questions from Louisa and Sade? Sorry, Councillor Etty.
Hi, so my question is about the worry that I think we all share about a possible perfect storm of children coming back into school and into kind of our services awareness, the financial burden on councils because of COVID and shortage of staff. So I wanted to hear, I'm not sure that I understood what the situation was in terms of staffing and caseload capacity. On one hand, I heard you said there was some capacity, on the other hand, not. So kind of clarification on that. And then I guess there's every reason to think that there are new families that are going to come into our attention that wouldn't traditionally use services, and that's going to need a really clear kind of outreach, normalizing access to help strategy, and I wanted to know where we're at with that.
Councillor Etty?
Oh,
sorry.
Is that for me, Councillor?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry. I mean, just to follow up. Thank you very much, Sarah, for the updates, and thank you everyone for the great work. Just to follow up on what you've said regarding the look after children and the increase. I'm just wondering the impact when it comes to foster care placement. And secondly, I've had a discussion with one or two people in my ward and who are childminders, and at the moment the source of income has reduced as well because so many parents, some parents are still working from home, and there's reduced number of children going for childminding. So there's a great concern. Is that something that we're looking into, or what? I just want more updates on that as well. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question around staffing and capacity. Yes, I'm sorry if I wasn't very clear. I think there are some parts of the system that are getting very, very busy now, and we know they're heating up. But because we've had less referrals coming into the system, those early bits, so our access and assessment teams, are actually, their caseloads have gone down through this period. So they've been helping out with some of the other areas, but we're ready for more referrals to come in. They've got capacity to respond in the early phases. We will then need to really look at what is coming in and do some predictions about where it's going to go in the system. So which things are going to stay in the system and what the likely longer term impacts on that will be. And as that goes through, I think, you know, our general approach is that we then look at whether we need more staffing, and then we speak with our finance colleagues about releasing some finance to support that. In terms of new families coming into the system, some of the things that we have been doing over the summer, both with Hackney Learning Trust and with Young Hackney, is trying to get more early help support and signposting capacity into our front door. So when referrals come in, seeing what we can help people to access in the early help system. So that's one of the things that we're doing to try and stop things coming in just into children's social care, but really helping people to access support out there. I believe that the council's helpline is still running, but a lot of that has been routed back through our first access and support team as well. So that's some of what we're doing, but it will be really about us monitoring what's going on in the system and seeing how we can adapt our services accordingly as we go forward. I mean, Councillor Etty, looked after children. The numbers are going up. It is placing some strain on our placements system. What we're finding is that we are managing to find placements for those young people, but we're tending to have to go for the more expensive placements. So we've actually got more children in residential care than we've ever had. Well, not ever had, but certainly that we've had for the last 10 years probably. So I think this week we've got over 40 children in residential care because it's getting very difficult to find foster placements for them. So again, you know, there are things that we're monitoring, there are things that we're trying to manage. The access to foster placements was impacted, certainly in terms of our in-house carers. We have quite a few who are elderly or from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds or have particular vulnerabilities, so they were sort of less available during the lockdown period. We're hoping that some of those will be coming back online again in the next few weeks. And in relation to childminders, that's actually doesn't really sit in my area. It's more one that I'll have to hand over to Annie, if that's okay, Annie.
Perhaps we can we take that one when we take questions for the education briefing, if possible. Thank you. Okay, I have questions now from Councillor Gordon and from Shabnam.
Thanks very much for your briefing, Sarah. I mean, obviously these are difficult and uncertain times, as we all know. My question is really about how much you can forecast the financial impact of the position that you're in and the uncertainty in particular, you know, in relation to having a very large number, a larger than usual number of children you know, in the system and potentially coming into the system. And it was very worrying to hear about the delays of children being on remand as well. I mean, each case of unnecessary delays in that is, you know, is personal tragedy and is something that's going to could have long-term effect on those children. I mean, all of those are going to contribute to cost pressures. So I just really wanted to know where you see how far you were able to predict the end of year financial position and what sort of contingency plans that you have. And if I could just be very, very cheeky, Chair, as well. I mean, again, I am alarmed to hear about, you know, our young people being in remand for extended periods. Is there anything we can do as a local authority to try and unplug that position? I mean, I know there's a lot of complex issues there. Thank you.
Can we have questions from Shabnam, please, and then over to you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you very much. If this is my question is about the digital divide, it's really good to see that Hackney is trying to supplement the provision from the DFE, but access to hardware is just one side of this issue. And a question on this was asked on a previous occasion about what Hackney was doing about access to the internet, to Wi-Fi around schools. It was mentioned that momentum was probably lacking on that, but I just wanted to ask what the progress was on that, especially if with contingency planning, if bubbles do end up having to resort to online learning.
Can I ask if Annie can answer that question also when we move on to the next briefing? Thank you.
So that's probably another one for Annie, really. Councillor Gordon, your question about, actually, first of all, probably I should clarify the issue about remand. We've got more young people who are now going on to remand. They've been waiting for their court cases to be heard. So they're not on remand and being stuck on remand, if that helps. With that particular situation, obviously, you know, I think for any young person when they've got something hanging over their head, you know, we've got lots of young people who are waiting for court hearings, and the longer they wait, the more traumatic that is. The issue about finances it's a really difficult one to answer. So we are very carefully logging all the additional expenditure that we are incurring at the moment in relation to COVID, and we're working very closely with our finance colleagues on that. Our finance colleagues, I know, are kind of working on developing some projections about how this might play out in our budgets over time, but I couldn't give you a figure right now. It will certainly have an impact. It will very certainly have an impact.
Is there a time that you're going to be able to give us a bit more of a figure in this commission? Because obviously, you know, this is a great concern as part of our budget scrutiny function. These are some of the highest cost pressures on us as a local authority in, you know, in very straitened times.
Yeah. I mean, we can certainly, I can go back to our finance colleagues and see what they're producing and when that might be ready. I don't know if Anne's on the call might be able to help.
There's a wider piece of work being done across the council, and it's both what the expenditure is because of COVID and what we can get some form of resource back from central government. So I don't think the difficulty is so much us saying what the cost is, but actually the difficulty is us being absolutely clear how much of that money is eligible to be part refunded from central government. I do want to give you some reassurance that we're being pretty tight about the expenditure and what it costs, and we'll know that, and it will come through to CMOB as well. I think it's one of the pieces of data that comes to the Members' Oversight Board, but I don't think it's appropriate for it to be published as yet without a clear indication of the total figure of the refund across the council. And I know that Ian Williams is working very closely to see what pots of money he can get some form of resource back into the council.
I mean, thank you. And obviously, I think we do want as much information about that as possible. It is, you know, something that's a great concern in a number of levels to our work. That.
Thank you very much. I just had one very, very brief question for you, Sarah, and that was again in relation to the foster carers. So it's my understanding that the fostering and adoption panels have been suspended. What is they haven't?
No, they're running.
Okay, that was in the draft legislation, so it's still going.
Yeah,
it's still going. Okay, and there's been no change in terms of the recruitment of foster carers. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Right, I think now we can move on to Annie, to our education update.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'll assume you've read the briefing, so I won't go through all of it, but just really some highlights. One looking back is about the summer activities that 18 of our schools were able to run for vulnerable children. So that enhanced the offer that Sarah's described from Young Hackney in the voluntary sector. So we had over 700 children in schools at different times over the holiday, which I think also helped with their readiness to return to school. I think we've all been waiting somewhat anxiously, but also looking forward to children being back in school, and head teachers and their staff have been planning very much since last July for this return. So it's very, well, I'm certainly enjoying seeing children going back into school every morning, and the very great majority of classes are now back in school. There is still some unrolling of the sort of staggered starts to happen this week, and we are getting attendance figures from some schools. We don't have the whole picture yet, and as I say, it's a staggered start, but some schools are up at 95% attendance, which is what one would normally expect. Some are below that, but we haven't yet been able to determine whether that's because of the staggered start. But at the moment, we've had no indication that there are any blips about the return. We send transport, there's an area there, and they also have been working very hard on their routes and the way they set up the buses to make sure that children are socially distant. So that has been going to plan this week. One of the things I did want to draw your attention to we are thinking about some of the vulnerable groups for whom either the return may be difficult or may even be impossible. And we know that for extremely clinically vulnerable children, there may be risks about returning, and schools will have set up particular arrangements for them. But we've again been talking with the Children and Families Service about children with a social worker, and we've got close working links there to make sure that those children are back in school. I think the other group we're concerned about are children who've got a prior mental health issue, or maybe an emerging mental health issue. I think we are well set up in Hackney. The wellbeing and mental health scheme in schools is well established, and many schools have had trauma-informed practice training. So I think that the vast majority of schools are well set up to support children on their return. I wanted to talk about childminding and then digital divide. We have seen throughout the pandemic early years settings, childminders, children's centres, independent nurseries stay open for the children of key workers and vulnerable children. But it has been difficult, particularly for some of the independent nurseries and for childminders, and their income has dropped. They have been able to access support, all of them, through the early years network that we run. And some of the nurseries have been able to access support from the business grant. We are concerned about it and we are monitoring it. We know more children are going back, but we are concerned about that, and we are keeping an eye on that and supporting our childminding network as we go forward. Just want to go back to if there was a case and children get sent home, and one of the things we are doing is sending out guidance to schools about what would be expected of distance learning, which Anton mentioned, and what is the minimum expectation that every child should get if they're going to be home for 2 weeks. So that is in place, and I think schools learned a lot from last year when they were thrown suddenly into distance learning. I think they've learned a lot about what works. I think also, I think it's unlikely that a whole school would get sent home. I think it is likely that in some cases we'll get one class or 1 year group sent home, which means that resources, the laptops and access to Wi-Fi, will be shared among a smaller group of pupils, the resources that the schools have. But I'm glad that we're being able to enhance that as a local authority with the scheme to get second-hand laptops and redistribute them. I think you're right to bring up the Wi-Fi issue, and I don't think we have a good solution that's universal yet. We know that we can give out temporary access. That's often temporary, and maybe that will work for the 2 week period that children might be at home during this time. But I think perhaps probably we need to come back with a more prepared presentation about the digital divide and the next steps, because there is significant work going on about it, but part of that is done by our ICT team. I'm happy to answer questions, Chair.
Thank you. So I have a question from Councillor Etty. Do we have any other questions from the Commission? And Councillor Peters. So Councillor Etty and then Councillor Peters.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Annie, for the updates, and thank you for all the hard work. My question is regarding the mental health with regards to the children, or young people. I know you've talked on that, but I just want to know a little bit about the practical support that the school will be giving to the young people from the beginning. And also, from my own end, from observation and having discussion with some parents, may I request or suggest that the teachers should be lenient with some of the students at this period, because some of them will still be going through this, might be going through this mental health or traumatic period because of what has happened, and not getting enough support and having to have detention or all that will compound a lot of things. So possibly, I don't know what you can do from your end with regards to that. And, and secondly, in Stamford Area, we're quite aware, we've all read it in terms of the increase in COVID, and we just have, that actually came from Public Health Dr. Sandra Husband. Is there any other additional work that we will be using to engage the local yeshiva school, towards this COVID-19 prevention and managing it? Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
So I think this is probably both for Sarah and Annie, in that some of what I think you were describing, Sarah, seemed to assume that all be on the basis that there will be a progressive easing of the lockdown. When we last met, we spoke about the possibility of a second wave, and Anne said that if that was going to happen, then her guess is that it would happen in the winter, and it's looking increasingly likely that that will happen, given the rising infection rates that we're seeing, the localised lockdowns, and the failure of the government to establish an effective test, trace, and isolate system. So are there particular things that we can be doing to make ourselves and our services more resilient to weather that what is probably a coming storm?
Okay, so if I start off first talking about the mental health question, we have given guidance out to schools about the sort of universal offer to all children, that the difficulties they've been through over the past 6 months need to be acknowledged and need to be vocalised by the children. And I think that is for all of them. We also know that some children will need some targeted support, and that is available through some trained teachers in school. Often it's someone they know in school, a member of staff they know is best placed to support them. There are also specialist CAMHS workers who attend school, and they can make sure that children are seen by a counsellor or somebody, or are referred through to specialist services. I think the other point was about reasonable adjustments, and we have again given guidance to schools that we do expect some space to be given to children about adjustments that they need to make. So obviously the children need to be in a position to learn, they need everybody behaving well, but that children may need some of the rules, and some of the things that they have to do are much different, like one-way systems and keeping apart from each other and having lessons where they're all facing the front rather than working in groups. Some of those will take some time to adjust to, and we have said the children need that explained to them. They may need explained several times and being inducted into that rather than being punished for getting it wrong first time. So we have made that clear to schools, and obviously the route is to take things up with schools if there are any issues, but also we're interested if there are any problems occurring. I think the other point was about Stamford Hill. So we are sending letters to schools in the wards most affected. Sometimes and those have been responded to by schools we've sent them to already. The response is stronger where we have a connection with the school. And while we don't have a connection with all the independent schools, we do have a connection via our early years team, who work quite a lot with the younger children, and they have a particular role in following up to make sure that the schools are following all the social distancing hygiene guidance robustly. There is also a possibility that we do have powers, or rather Dr. Husbands has powers to close down a school for a short time if necessary. We very much hope those won't be used, but that is a possibility. So I think in terms of preparing for a second wave, we are keeping up the messages to schools about maintaining the rigour of the processes that have been put in place and not relaxing after week one, and letting people stand close to each other or year groups mix, but really keeping up the rigour throughout. I think Anne?
Yeah, Annie, have you finished? I just want to, Councillor Etty, you asked specifically about yeshiva schools, and actually the yeshivas are not schools, they're settings. But Annie and others, and certainly I've already with Dr. Husband sent a letter into one of those settings. So we're trying to do as much as we can, but they work under a different structure than the schools that schools that are registered. And I think we just must be clear about that.
Yes, thank you. That you are very right. Thank you very much.
Your ward, your constituents.
Thank you very much. I just had one supplement. Oh, actually, I think Councillor Woodley, did you want to come in? No, I can't see you on the grid, so I'm not sure if you're there or if you still want to talk. Okay, I just had a question to ask again about the digital divide, and then I think we're going to have to move on. And that was just the role that our libraries and other community spaces can play potentially in terms of community halls and other community spaces. If we don't have enough devices to go around, is it a case of pooling what we do have so that everybody can have access?
I think that I'm very conscious that many children would use libraries if they were able to for studying, partly for access to Wi-Fi and also partly access to a quiet space. So I think if some libraries can open safely, others it's more difficult to do so, but I think that's a really important thing to happen. And I think that at the moment, I suppose the responsibility for providing devices lies with the schools, and we are supporting schools to do that. But I think it is a good point that in our looking at preparing for any shutdowns, that we do explore other options where there might be spaces available. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Woodley, I'm not sure if we're able to hear you now. Doesn't seem that way. Councillor Poster, very, very briefly, and a very, very brief one from Councillor Gordon. I'm going to hold you to this. You've both said they're going to be really quick.
My quick comment, obviously we've been very concerned about the impacts on mental health of children during this COVID crisis. Anecdotally, I've just heard a little bit recently from some children that I know of that actually they have experienced a bit of a benefit in terms of mental health of the kind of effects of peer pressure, etc. In a roundabout way, their confidence has increased in a certain aspect. Now, I know this is a very small sample anecdotally, but I'm sure that's replicated to a certain extent. Of course, that does not diminish any of the other negative impacts, which are great. I just wondered whether at some point when you do look at this in much more deeper, whether we could perhaps learn lessons from maybe looking at the mental health more widely about how we can perhaps mitigate some of the negative impacts that children do experience going to school. That's a bit of an aside, and I realise that's not one really for now, but I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, and Councillor Gordon, very briefly, please.
Just a quick question: do the public health powers to close down institutions extend to unregistered settings, because obviously they're not schools?
Should I just, Councillor Gordon, they do, but they are very rarely used. So I don't want to excite your expectation that the reality of this actually happening. That the letter does, what we've been able to say to these settings is that there is that power there that will be used and if necessary, but it covers all settings.
It was just a point of clarification. I'm not suggesting anything unnecessary draconian, of course not. So.
Thank you, Anne. And just to go back to the point of some children, their mental health benefiting from being off school, I think for a proportion of children, that sometimes is the case because the pressures, as you said, of peer pressure or of the academic side being too much at times for some children. And I know some families have found having less of a rigorous timetable a bit more relaxing as well. So I think there probably are some benefits that, a range of people have had. Although it's critical that children are back in education, but I think you're right in us reflecting on this period and learning from it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Woodley, one last attempt.
Okay, I've left and come back. Is it working? Oh my goodness.
It's working, we can hear you.
Well, I might have to apologise now because perhaps Sarah did touch on this and I just missed it, but I wasn't sure if we spoke about the Disabled Children's Service and short breaks. And I did want to point out, because I thought people, particularly if they watched Panorama last night, might have been very worried about our disabled children. And I have to sort of say that a lot of our families living with children with special educational needs will have really struggled over this COVID period. But the short breaks team did go out of their way to call everybody that's actively on their list. Did it bring into the summer offer more flexibility on the sort of the money that they provide to their families to purchase things like home equipment, and to also allow even extended family members to take children on trips and to give them essentially that kind of necessary respite. And Councillor Bramble kindly mentioned the visits that I took to adventure playgrounds over the summer. One of my agendas there really was to look at the inclusivity of those spaces. And I have to tell you, walking into a playground in 35-degree heat and having a child with additional needs run up to you and not care that you're a dignitary of some sort on a local level and spray you with a water pistol and hand you an ice pole is probably the best thing one could do to sort of realise that the kids are in the right setting, all right, And the last place I visited was Kids Adventure, which of course we access through our Disabled Children's Service. And exactly what Annie was just touching on there, some of those children had actually benefited from having this kind of more relaxed period, I suppose, out of school. This is not the case for all children, clearly. But for those children in that setting, some of them had been entirely non-verbal and had actually kind of surprised staff members in the setting with a greeting, had formed a friendship which had been a bit beyond their capacity before. So there is just something to be said about the work that was done there by that service. I'm sure a lot more needed to be done, but it was very good to see that, and I hope that offers some reassurance.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to have to move on from this item because we're running quite significantly over time. But I just wanted to say that I think it's an emerging picture that we're going to have to. I think there's still so many unknowns because the children and young people have only just gone back to school. But I think the main thing that I'd like to ask for, I think, for the next meeting is the financial forecasting. I think it would be really useful for us to have that. So yeah, once again, just to thank you both for your written reports and for your verbal updates. Really grateful for that, and your contribution also, Councillor Woodley. Okay, moving on to item 6, racial inequality and unconscious bias. I'd like to ask members to turn to page 15 of the agenda pack. The death of George Floyd and subsequent Black Lives Matter protests have highlighted racial inequalities across public services. The Commission has invited the Directors of Children and Families and Hackney Learning Trust to set out the work to help identify and address racial inequalities and unconscious bias in the policies and practices of their respective departments. The purpose of this item is threefold: to ensure that the Commission has oversight of the work in respect of children and young people's services to combat racial inequalities, to provide challenge to local strategies, plans or work to address racial inequalities, and to assess whether further more detailed scrutiny is necessary for particular areas. We have 60 minutes for this item, but because we're running over time, I think we're going to have to cut that back. So if everybody can please be as brief as possible. So we have 30 minutes from both Children and Families and 30 minutes from Hackney Learning Trust. Can we start with Children and Families? And can I ask if you can highlight key areas of work within about 10 minutes, and then we'll go to questions. So over to Sarah or Lisa, I'm not sure who's...
We're going to present together, but I'll start off. But I don't know if Councillor Bramble, did you want to say something?
Yes, Sarah, just a few words, Chair. I would say that going back before the horrific death of George Floyd, Hackney has had a programme called Improving Outcomes for Young Black Men, and this is something that I've championed. So it's something that we've identified and acknowledged locally. I must say at this point, it's really important that we don't stigmatise everyone in the Black community or all Black men. There are very successful young Black men there, but we're dealing with the disproportionality that is in the system and how we can better support the outcomes for young Black men. And that's a piece of work that's been going on for some time. In response to George Floyd, we've been doing some specific works around that. Unfortunately, terrible things have been happening to Black people for a long time, Chair. But what this did is that a moment in time during COVID, everybody was looking at injustice in a way that wasn't seen before. So there's a real opportunity now to extend on the work that we're doing. Children's Services have been doing work with staff looking at key areas around reading, training and support, and thinking about what that looks like. There's been discussions with staff, breakout areas to facilitate that. When I spoke to head teachers and staff, I recommended that they have a BME or Black only space to have discussions. So anything triggered and personal is discussed there before bringing to a wide staff team. They agreed that was a good idea, and Annie worked really swiftly with her staff, Orleen and up to get that up and off the ground and facilitated really, really quickly. I think there's been engagement with young people, making sure we're hearing their voice in this, and I've been also to sixth forms to speak to parents about those concerns, but I'll hand over to the service to talk about some other work. But just to highlight, Chair, this is something as a council we have identified and been championed for some time, but absolutely accept this mode and believe that Hackney can be part of that broader response. And the Mayor and I have spoken about that as well. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor Bramble.
Councillor Conway, can I just say a few words, and then I'm very conscious that there are quite a few of us going to say a few words. So you've got, you know, we're sort of handing over the baton, and I just want to sort of bring a bit of an overview of the service, and I'll be really, I promise you, really quick. I think, just to echo what Councillor Bramble said, you know, the service has always been committed to eradicating, you know, racial inequality and bias. But frankly, the George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the inequalities of COVID has really forced us to confront the kind of uncomfortable truth that actually the progress was frankly not good enough. And those inequalities remain, and, you know, it's forced us to bring a lens up to look at what we do and actually challenge us to have some honest discussions internally. And this is a very large service in the council and a very large service area with a lot of staff and, you know, great responsibility for us to make a change. Across both services, there are probably 3 key areas of work, and I just want you'll hear the theme running through both when Sarah and her colleagues and Annie and her education colleagues talk. One of which is looking at our practice, which we know and you know, this is across all of the services, by the impact, the outcomes, it's not impactful enough in reducing inequalities. And, you know, it's issues that we've discussed here again and again. So we're looking very specifically at service delivery at the practice. We're looking very closely at inclusivity of the workforce, and indeed by the manifestation of who are here as officers, and certainly at the more senior levels, and you've mentioned it yourself, Chair, you know, that it hasn't worked through, that it's not an inclusive representative workforce at all levels through the organisation, and we are looking really, really thoughtfully and determinedly with colleagues about what we need to do and what we need to do at pace to lay down, you know, change for the future. And I think the third thing is about educating all of us in all our different ways about these issues and strengthening the moral imperative that the current situation which we're in critical means that the pace at which change is needed has to accelerate. And I think we bring all of us here that great commitment that we, you know, we are dealing with COVID, and it's been absolutely a kind of cut through service delivery on a general basis, but actually we have given such attention to this issue that it's probably difficult to articulate it in a kind of convincing way, you know, until you hear what the others. I really want the Scrutiny members to I suppose appreciate our commitment to making a difference, and the challenge back from you about the fact that we know there's a long way to go. So I just wanted to say that. Sarah, over to you and Lisa.
Thank you. I'm going to try to present, so if people could just stick with me for a while. So hopefully people can see this.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to talk about really was the action plan that we are developing in Children and Family Service. And I think, as Councillor Bramble and Anne have both indicated, this isn't new work that we're doing. This is work that is really building on things that we've already done, but we've taken the Black Lives Matter movement and the George Floyd murder as an opportunity to really refocus and regalvanise some of our efforts. And I think with that, you know, there's a real determination within the service to not allow ourselves to take our foot off the pedal on this. So not to allow some of that impetus that has built up to dissipate and to be diverted onto other things. So we did for some time have an action plan in place in relation to the improving outcomes for young black men. What we've done more recently is shift this into an anti-racist action plan, which has a kind of broader, more systemic approach within it. This has been developed by our leadership team, so our overall leadership team within Children and Families, and by our Black Managers Group, which was set up following the death of George Floyd. So all of our Black members of staff who are in management positions, there's I think 40 odd people who've chosen to be part of that group, and we've really asked them to participate in developing this and to take some leadership in it as well. So what we're doing at the moment as well alongside this is developing an anti-racist statement. So we've got something in draft, we just need to run it past a few more people, but we want a really powerful, short, pithy statement that everybody in the organisation can recognise, can subscribe to, can sign up to, and we're all brought into a direction of travel on this. So we have identified 3 key areas of work. These fit very much with so what Anne was saying earlier. So the first one is really around our workforce and inclusive recruitment and aspirational support for staff. The second one is around leadership in relation to practice, so really thinking about the experience that children and families have of our services and how we make sure that we're not practicing in a way that is either discriminatory or adds to people's experience of discrimination. And then the last one is thinking about how we influence the broader system. So recognising that there are things that we can do within our own system, but how do we have an impact, a greater impact externally, and empower the children and families that we work with to have an impact society-wide, really. So one of the things that we're doing is developing some working groups on each of those key threads. What we're trying to do is make sure that we're not trying to do too much. So I think when we look back at some of our previous action plans, there was just, lots and lots and lots of actions. But what we want to do is really hone in on the actions, the things that will have the highest impact going forward. So we've got some working groups developing around each of these aspects. My colleague Lisa Aldridge has joined me, and I'm going to pass over to her to speak to the next few slides to just talk about on the first two of those what we've done to date and what we already have coming online. So Lisa.
Hi, thanks for handing over, Sarah. So what we've got here is just... do
you want to enlarge your screen so we can see? If you go to present mode...
Oh, sorry, yeah. Is that better?
Yes, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, back to Lisa.
Still sorts of things that are in our action plan, as Sarah said, either things that we've achieved or things that are part of our next steps. So we're very conscious that across the workforce we have areas of the workforce that are very diverse and areas of the workforce that are far less so, and that's particularly at senior management levels. It's very apparent that we're a very white senior management group. So we want to think about our succession planning and how we're going to change that going forward. Some of the things that we have done is we've changed to anonymous recruitment this year. We've increased diversity on interview panels. That was back in last summer that we've taken forward. And we've got systems in place now to track and monitor the diversity of the workforce across the whole directorate and at each level as well. And we're going to be using that information to track and monitor change as we take the programme of actions forward. Some of our next steps, well, we've recently supported a Black leadership group to establish itself, and the leadership group have asked for some external facilitation to support conversations between Black leaders and the senior management group in particular. So we're just in the process of exploring options for that. We're just starting to review senior management group in particular, so we're just in the process of exploring options for that. We're just starting to review all aspects of our recruitment process, making sure we haven't got anything in the process that has an unhelpful barrier, creates an unhelpful barrier to accessing posts throughout the department, and also ensuring that our assessments, interview questions, etc., are attentive to diversity and the impact of discrimination as well. We're going to more closely monitor the way in which training opportunities are shared and provided across the service to ensure equity and ensure that Black staff in particular have key opportunities for training to move into leadership roles. One of our next steps is to set up a peer support group for Black practitioners. So far we've just got the leadership group in place. And one of the other things that the Black leadership group have helpfully supported us to think about is not only how do we ensure we have diversity on panels, interview panels, but how do we proactively attend to the power dynamics in those meetings so that it doesn't become a tokenistic attendance, but actually meaningful, diverse views within different forums taking place. So that's around our recruitment and support to staff. A couple of key things around our leadership and practice within children and families. So as Sarah said, we're developing a position statement, and that's really so that we can be clear with partner agencies and with ourselves around the expectations, and we can hold ourselves to account, and partners can hold us to account around proactive anti-racist practice as well. We've set up what's called a Google community. So it's in and out on articles, research, papers, etc. Really to support staff to develop and take ownership for their own learning or unlearning of racism as and where needed. We're developing and commissioning some specific training for staff, and we'll always be ensuring that training and services that we commission are in tune with our anti-racist practice standards. And I've already referred to this, sort of thinking about the diversity in decision-making panels as well. That's something we want to make sure we're doing thoughtfully and meaningfully throughout all of our work. So just some of the next steps in terms of our leadership in practice. So we've got this autumn, we're planning to provide training to the whole service, some baseline training on anti-racist practice across children and families, and that's going to be facilitated by Wayne Reed. I'm sure many people will have seen some of his blogs, his writing, and he's providing that through British Association of Social Work. So that's our starting point, but we're looking to create and develop a 3-year programme of conversations to really embed anti-racist practice within our day-to-day work with children and families. And I think that's really because we've recognised that in the past we may have provided the odd one-off training or a short series of trainings, but we haven't necessarily been able to identify the impact of that. So hence we're having a 3-year programme of continuing conversations to really embed this into everyone's learnings. We're going to be developing our anti-racist practice standards, supporting people to develop in line with those, and obviously holding ourselves to account to hold up to those. And to support practitioners in the front line, as well as all of those other actions, we're going to be developing some systemic and anti-racist practice tools, particularly to support conversations with families about their experiences. And those conversations have been taking place over the summer with families around their experience of the impact of COVID, their experience of being re-traumatised through the murder of George Floyd, etc., and how that's impacting upon them. But we really want to support practitioners to feel confident in continuing those conversations into the long term. So I'm just going to hand back to Sarah now, who's going to talk about the third goal within our action plan.
Thanks, Lisa. So the final goal that we've got in our action plan is this one really about influencing the wider system. So this is kind of a process of us really thinking about where we can have impact in different places. So we're particularly keen to be thinking through some of the partnership boards that we are represented on or that we lead, but how we can work with other agencies to address racism in society and in broader practice. So for instance, through Safer Young Hackney board, which I chair, we've been asking the police to provide information and analysis around stop and search, but we're also looking at the disproportionality of young black men within the judicial system, and planning some work with the courts around sentencing, and thinking about trauma and the impact of trauma when they're thinking about sentencing. We're also looking at how we're going to support staff to provide constructive challenge to other agencies. So we're already having some conversations with staff about those issues and asking staff to let their managers know and to kind of surface any instances that they come across where they feel that another agency is behaving in a way that isn't consistent with what we would aspire to in terms of anti-racist practice, and then helping them to think about either how they can address that or how at a more strategic level we can address some of those issues. I've mentioned the courts already, but also, particularly through the work that Young Hackney does, I think people might already be aware of some of the work that they do around critical conversations, but also some of the work that they do alongside the voluntary and community sector in addressing racism, but empowering young people to have some of those conversations, including conversations with things like the police, etc., around stop and search. And then other things that we're looking at, sorry, I've gone forward a bit too much. We're also looking to review our commissioning framework with other agencies to make sure that we are doing what we need to do to empower some of those agencies in the voluntary and community sector to take on some of this work, but also holding people to account that we do commission to make sure that they are behaving in a way that's consistent with the way that we expect our own services to be delivered. So that's a kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really, of some of the work that we're doing. Obviously, we're doing an awful lot more than that, but time is limited. So we just kind of wanted to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we're doing at the moment. So happy to take questions. I know we've also got the education stuff to get through.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I'm thinking actually that potentially we will the next item we will deal with through emails, so that we perhaps have some more time to cover this item, because there's quite a lot of ground for us to cover, and we're fortunate enough to have quite a few of you here to contribute. So I have questions from Councillor Hanson and Louisa first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested to see on the last slide you had up an item about working with youth courts to ensure proportionate decision making. I wonder if you could tell us what that looks like and what influence we have over the youth courts.
Okay, and Louisa?
Yep, I had two questions. One was really about intersectionality. So kind of, I'd be interested to hear about how the work around contextual safeguarding, the impact of cultural trauma and socio-economic disadvantage cross-references with the work that we're doing with children and families. How is it that we bring that to the core of the conversation? And how is it that we can equip social workers to have different conversations to the ones that we classically have, which are just family-wide? I guess part of this is acknowledging that the system is bigger than the family. And the other question is about data. In order for us to be able to provide the scrutiny that Anne asked us to, we need to know what the baseline is. So I was really surprised to hear on a universal level, how do we not have data that tells us about the exam results from kind of cross-referencing information about ethnic minorities, going through to early help, child in need, child protection. Kind of, we need to know what the data is, so we can then look back, because the intentions I don't doubt, but if we can't go back and question the data, then we won't be able to know whether or not we're making any difference.
Great. So work with the youth courts. It's a fairly national issue, but the courts do seem to be disproportionately punitive towards black young men. I think that's well evidenced. I think it's a key issue for the Youth Justice Board nationally. We have started some conversations with our youth courts locally, and with the user group. So there's the court that we largely use, the Stratford one. There's a number of other local authorities that also use that court, and we're trying to work with them to find some time that we can do some trauma-informed practice training with them, but also look at what else we can do to help them to really understand the experiences of young people that come before them, so that they can factor those into their decision making. There is an openness from the courts around that. There's more openness than I've ever seen around it. So I think there's more work that we can do. We also know that some of the other courts in London, particularly the North London court, the user group for them, they've been doing quite a lot of work as well around disproportionality. So we're trying to do some sharing across the youth justice sector within London to look at what might have worked in other areas. So we're also looking at doing things like, you know, including statements within our court statements, and statements that we make into court in support of young people around trauma, around that young person's experiences of racism, their experiences of disadvantage and discrimination, so that we can help the courts to think about those things. There's a lot of work to do on it. In terms of intersectionality, absolutely, you know, entirely agree. There are lots of different you know, levels of discrimination. It is a societal issue, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've got that kind of third aspect, which is around how do we influence the bigger system. We use systemic approaches within our practice in children and families, and within that there's an approach that we talk about, which is thinking about social graces, and that's really, you know, a tool that we ask practitioners to use to think about all the different aspects of somebody's identity and their experience, and how their life experiences influence them. So whether that's gender, race, ethnicity, culture, religion, etc., all those different things within that. So that is very much on our agenda. In terms of data, these are referenced some of the work we've been doing to really understand our workforce data. We have for quite a few years collected workforce data in relation to the social work workforce, because we have to report on that to the DfE, but we're now doing some much more detailed work to understand our workforce right across children and families. We've also done quite a lot of analysis of young people as they come in and go through our system. So what both, you know, in terms of ethnicity and in terms of gender and age, etc., and looking within that also at poverty indicators. So we've got some quite rich data. It's really complicated data, and it's very difficult sometimes to disentangle what's what. So we know that you know, Black and mixed heritage young people are overrepresented within our children's social care system, but we also know that there are some sectors of the white community that are underrepresented as well. So we've got that data. We are, you know, doing what we can to analyse it and make sense of it, and it is a base point from which we can then measure ourselves against in terms of success.
Thank you very much.
Can I just kind of, the data was, I think it's important to have the data across. I was kind of, part of the question was, one, we'd like to have it, I think, and two, kind of the exam, kind of, Councillor Conway asked the question of the exam results and cross-referencing them with ethnicity. I think having data about the population, I mean, staff, of course, needs to be represented, but actually having that information about exam results as well as other indicators in universal settings is really important.
I think what Louise is saying is spot on, really, in terms of just referring, I think, to that Nuffield Foundation report, and that was children and families in the borough, but also, yes, I think we do have data on the intervention rates for these children and young people, and I think we've not yet decided, I don't think, how we're going to follow up on this, but one thing is for certain is that I think that this would be really useful for the purposes of our review that we're hoping to do, looking into adolescents entering the care system later on in this municipal year. And I think that that information would be incredibly useful in that context, to have a look at the overrepresentation of this cohort of young people through that particular lens. And just because I think we will be looking anyway at early help, sorry, and to get a sense of how services interact with families, essentially, and if there's a different way. But I think it would be useful before that point for us to have that information. I know you said that it's probably quite difficult to get your head around, but it might be quite useful just for us to have a sense of what we're dealing with, and whether, if all things considered, certain groups are just still overrepresented. And what other local authorities perhaps are doing to address this. Okay, I think we've got another question from Councillor Etty, and then we may have to move on to education. Councillor Etty?
Thank you, Chair. I think, thank you for the slides and identifying the 3 key areas. Honestly, there's a lot of job that has been done on that, no doubt about that. And definitely anti-racism is something for all of us. It's not for one person. It's everybody's job, and it's always a very complex or a topic that people tend to be uncomfortable with. But I'm quite happy that we're bringing this in the open, and we're happy that we're discussing this freely and providing solutions to the gaps of inequality in our borough. I really don't have much question, but I just wanted to ask with regards to the Black managers group that you have just set up, and currently within our system, in terms of in terms of leadership, senior roles within the schools, what percentage of minority ethnic groups do we have at the moment in terms of the senior leadership role across our schools? Do you have an idea, please?
Sarah's just left.
But it was across schools, were you saying, Councillor Etty?
Sorry, you're on mute, Councillor Etty.
Yeah, yes, please, yeah.
So just while Sarah, I was just going to say in relation to posts and roles across children and family services, we've got all of that data that we can share after the meeting. I don't have it in front of me, which obviously it demonstrates quite clearly that at senior management levels we're predominantly white, and that's one of the key things that we need to address. But in terms of across schools, if that was one of the questions, that might be best for Annie to respond to. Sarah's just
sorry, just a quick one. With regards to all the plans that you have in place, will it be possible probably to have a review probably in the next 6 months and see where we are, or 1 year, to see the practicality of what has been achieved, what needs to be achieved in terms of the short, medium and long term, and see how best we can all work together towards that? Is that something that is possible?
I think that's a really important point, because I think, as you mentioned, Anne, that actually many of these ambitions we've had for a long time, and actually what's changed is perhaps that we're all sort of accepting that it's not, that the progress has been far too slow. So if anything, I think the main thing is actually just ensuring that we're keeping a watchful eye of the progress that is made and the speed at which it's made. So yeah, I think that's a good question to ask.
I was going to say, I think that's a really helpful suggestion, and one that we'd welcome. You know, we welcome the scrutiny and the contributions really to really taking this plan forward. So yeah, more than happy to bring it back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, in which case I think we'll probably move on now to Hackney Learning Trust. So can we have 10 minutes to highlight key areas of work, and then we'll have a quick question and answer session afterwards. So we've got, we'll be hearing from Annie Gammon, the Director of Education, Anton Francic, Principal Secondary Advisor, and Orleen Badu, the System Leader for Young Black Men Project. So handing over to you three.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to present, so it just might take me a moment. Let me just, there we So yes, the three of us are going to talk about things that we are doing to tackle racism and further develop equality, and that's within Hackney Education, within our own directly employed staff, but also in our role as influencers of the wider system across our maintained schools, our settings, and across academies. And we're going to talk about policies and practices, inclusive workforce and leadership, and developing a Black curriculum. I wanted to say something about what we've done since the killing of George Floyd. We've sent messages to all staff, and as Councillor Bramble said, messages went to schools, to children. We've had 2 open meetings for staff, Hackney Education staff and settings, led by myself and Councillor Bramble, which have been really well attended. And started off with people expressing feelings and then moving on to people talking about what they wanted to see happen. Again, as Sarah has talked about and Councillor Bramble's talked about, we've had a meeting, and there will be more, led for and by colleagues identifying as Black, about issues they perceive. We've also set up and implemented initial curriculum work, instigated by Councillor Bramble and led by Orleen Badu, involving teachers across Hackney, and Orleen will say more about that. The Hackney Schools Group Board has implemented and supported 6 school-based meetings with parents to talk about race in 6 different schools, which volunteered through those open
dwelling on a negative narrative or a narrative of oppression, and I think lots of young people feel like that has happened in any history they've ever learnt about their own culture in schools, and that actually the point of being diverse and decolonising and being inclusive is for all children. I think it's very much about working with schools in understanding that we're creating future leaders, and if we're really going to avoid tokenism and create real social change, and it's about kind of empowering all of our students to understand our history and how that's connected. I've written diversify and decolonise because I think one of the things that actually this is what it looks like at face value, but what does it really mean, and what does it mean to me? Where are the silences in our curriculum? Where are the areas that we're not reflected, and why was that, and how can we kind of challenge that? Local history is highlighted within it, just in terms of our Hackney history, national and global. But to be honest with you, a lot of the work that started from the Young Black Men Project and has continued throughout has been around kind of understanding that the issue is not the group, the issue is kind of our perception of our young people, and the same goes in terms of the history that we're teaching them. So the racial literacy of staff and governors is paramount. If we're going to affect real social change, our staff need to understand what race and racism means in the UK, and how that impacts on the students that they serve and how it impacts on their lives as well. So a lot of work is being done with schools around kind of understanding that it's their responsibility to make sure that their staff have a strong racial literacy, and understand the experiences of their students to be able to know how to give them the skills that's necessary, and that's all children again. It's obviously not the work of history teachers alone, and if we're addressing equality, it has to go right across the staff board. I think Professor Paul Miller talked about that need for a global perspective, so how children see work that we're doing at the Trust is really seeing parents as partners, and I think if we change that dialogue, that changes the way that we engage together. And the support, and it also kind of threads through it that idea of well-being and that sense of belonging, because all of the research says that if children have a strong sense of belonging, they feel connected, they feel engaged, and they feel motivated. And kind of, so it's a big aim that I'm suggesting that we're going to have within that curriculum, but the lesson plans have been created by teachers in Hackney. There is a lot of expertise in Hackney, and it was trying to pull that all together. And there was quite an extensive process that the staff had to go through. And we've also created a kind of think piece document that kind of looks at all the research and gets schools to think about how they can create their own curriculum, but also have resources there that they can begin to use. And I think one of the things I would say is that one of the things that comes up time and again is about kind of the teachers' knowledge of history, and again that kind of idea of racial literacy be really important to support that. I think that's it, Annie. I don't want to go on for too long.
Thank you, Orleen. So I wanted to talk about having an inclusive workforce and leadership, and I think Sarah's alluded to, and we know that having role models in schools for children is so important. Role models who look like them, who understand them. And so we are developing a recruitment toolkit for head teachers and governors about ensuring that they recruit, develop, promote, retain Black staff. We know there are differences in, and I know there was a question earlier about the what were the proportions of staff. We don't have numbers for all across all the schools, but we do have some numbers which I can present at a future meeting. Within our service, we want the service team's improvement plans to include equality and inclusion aims. I just want to emphasise the point Orleen made about being articulate about race. So already we've seen teams spend significant time on developing their racial literacy. Will be gathering that information as they visit schools. I talked about the Hackney Schools Group Board links with parents, and they are aiming to roll that out to as many schools as possible over the coming term. And we intend to have a Hackney Parents Conference about race in the near future. I'm going to hand over to Anton.
Thank you, Annie. I too will try to be brief. So much of the content that we've heard before, but just to restate something, is a lot of this work continues from the Young Black Men programme, and as Annie said at the outset of this presentation, we've taken forward that work, which had 5 pillars, which was looking at the development of leadership and culture, which you can see in the top line on the slide in front of you. where we're rolling out training on unconscious bias, cultural competency, but we also want to plan to revisit those areas, schools and services that have received that training to see how they're applying it. And another element of the strategy which has been taken forward with Black Lives Matters was to do with tracking of outcomes. We do have outcomes data, and we're at the point with the data where we can look at cohorts and see what differences are being made. So, for example, last year, the gap with Black Caribbean boys narrowed, but with Black African girls increased. You can see on the slides here, that concentrating on policy and practice. So with behaviour, which is one of the strands in the original Young Black Men programme, now being taken forward with Black Lives Matters, we are looking at these model policies, but we're also looking at classroom pedagogies that don't exclude. So earlier on, when I mentioned addressing bias, we're sharing with schools a cultural responsiveness self-checking tool, which can be used in any year group, any subject, at any point. It's not just about exams, it's about current classroom practice. Annie and Orlin have both said that we're looking to solidify the way that we work with and respond to the voice of pupils and parents. So to that end, my counterpart in primary and myself representing those phases will be meeting with the Youth Parliament and with Young Futures and listening to and talking with those young people. We'll also be talking with those people as part of the governance structure that's been developed around the old Young Black Men programme. I think I'm going to leave it there because there's a lot of detail that you've received from us, and I'm quite happy with my colleagues to receive questions.
Thank you very much to you all. Really, really valuable contributions, and really blown away by the work that you're involved with. It sounds incredibly ambitious, and just really proud that we're doing what we are. I had a question actually about the leadership in our schools and whether we have a sense of whether children from BAME backgrounds perform better at schools where there is better BAME leadership. There are higher numbers of sort of BAME leadership within the schools, because the sense that I'm getting from what we're hearing is that we have some of the data, but I'm not sure whether we've put all of this data together to get a sense of what the actual impact of having increased number of, or better BAME representation, should I say, in leadership roles in our schools. I'm wondering if anybody could answer.
I'm going to try and answer, but I'm not sure if you can hear me because my screen's frozen.
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So I think the most important thing for the children's achievement is really strong, robust leadership, good policies and practice, great teachers, well-trained, great staff. And I would say that some of our higher achieving schools don't necessarily have great representation. However, in terms of a sense of belonging, I do think the representation is very important. And I don't think there's any difference between a strong black head teacher and a strong white head teacher in terms of probably what the quality of teaching is like. I do think sometimes that sense of belonging and the welcoming of children and parents can be different, not from our very skilled head teachers on either side. So I'm not quite sure what the numbers would show. I'm sort of predicting there might be something about belonging that would be different.
I know this might be a strange sort of reference to make, but I remember listening to a podcast about segregation in America and hearing that black children actually performed better when schools were segregated than they did when the schools were integrated. So that was quite interesting for me, and I think what came from that podcast was actually that the impact that having better Black representation in schools had. But yeah, so I think what's coming out for me certainly is a need for us to have a better idea of these stats, and to perhaps get used to just always having this data accessible so that we can get a greater sense of the situation. So when we are looking at attainment levels or admissions, to always have a sense of what the workforce looks like, as well as what the children and young people that we're serving, what their backgrounds look like also. Sorry, Anne, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, Councillor Conway, it's a really interesting question, and back in the day I haven't researched it recently, but it's something perhaps we could look at if there is evidence of that relationship. Because I know, whilst I say, Annie, it's about your sense of belonging, but actually, in order for you to be ready for learning, you've got to, you'll feel more settled in that sense of belonging will accelerate your ability and your achievements to learn, I'm sure, if you can recognise in some of the leaders in the organisation somebody that you could aspire to. But I think it would be worth to look for some evidential base, and Orleen may be able to come in and hear, and I hear, because I can't but believe there must be a correlation between them. So can I just ask Orleen, I think, are you chomping at the bit to correct
I
you?
was. Only quickly, if that's all right. I know that one of the things I'd say is, having been a Black head teacher myself as well, I think there's definitely something around belonging, and I think there's definitely something around, I would also say that in schools, whilst we're educating our children, we're also creating the future teaching workforce. And when lots of people say to me, well, we have really low numbers of Black male teachers, if we think about what we're saying about the data about young Black men in education, it stands to reason that they're not coming back to be teachers because their experience hasn't been positive enough. So I think one of the things about representation in your school is just ensuring that all children see a pathway for themselves, potentially in that organisation in the future as adults. And I think that's something that I haven't quite found the research that pertains to that yet, but I'm pretty sure there is some, or I'm about to produce it. So.
Chair, can I quickly say, I'm not advocating for segregation, but what I think we can do in our schools is look at the data and look at areas where we see that Black boys or are from ethnic backgrounds, if they are highly proported, look at the makeup of the pupils in the schools. So, i.e., we can have a look at, are children from Black and ethnic background performing dominant race in that school? I think that's what we can tease out in the data. So not just linking in, looking at staff representation, but from ethnic backgrounds are in the majority, what performance looks like.
Sorry, I think we just missed you, the last bit of that, Councillor Bramble, your reception.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I was just saying we can look at adults and looking at when you've got representation from Black or ethnic minority adults in school. But I think there's something we can do with the data around children in our schools, looking at where children are predominantly, where you've got predominantly Black children or children from ethnic minority children, and looking at, are they then the strong performers? So there are instances where children are doing well in our schools that are from ethnic backgrounds. Are they in schools where they are in the majority, although ethnic minority in the minority, if that makes sense? So it's looking at what the data can tell us.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful. Do we have any questions from the Commission? I can see Louisa's hand, because I don't have the grid function. If anybody else wants to ask any questions, could you please put it in the chat function? Louisa.
It's not a big one, but I think it'd be remiss of me, being that I'm here as a parent governor, to open a question about parent governors and the role of representation of governing bodies in school leadership, and whether that's something that we should be finding out more about. I'm kind of just thinking of my governing body and how unrepresentative of the school community it is.
Okay, Councillor Peters.
Just on developing the curriculum, how are we, will it be a work of persuasion rather to try to get schools and particularly free schools and academies, to adopt a black curriculum that we develop.
So I doing with their curriculum. So I think definitely sort of the grief, there's a think piece called Grief Leadership that talks about kind of what happens as a result of a pandemic. And one of the things it talks about is the fact that it exacerbates inequality, it shines a light on inequality, hence the dreadful death of George Floyd during that time is what was the catalyst. And I think from what I've noticed from schools is that lots of schools are coming back and saying we need to work on our curriculum, we need to develop it, this is what we've done. So I think the work is definitely happening across many of the schools, and I'm really thankful that our school improvement partners are going into schools from September and saying, so tell us what you're doing with your curriculum, and highlighting the curriculum that's available for schools as well. So I think that kind of will ensure that they're aware that it's out there. And many of the schools that I've spoken to are really welcoming a curriculum that kind of guides them in the right direction. So I think a lot of schools want to do the work, but it's having that sort of guide, and that's part of the reason for the curriculum, to kind of give them a clear idea of how to do it. And there is a document that will come along with it that says how you practically put that together yourself, but here are some resources as well to enable that to happen. So I think there isn't, as far as I know, there is no mandate for them to follow it, but the intel that I have from kind of the schools that we're engaging with over the summer to now, and that's continuing, is that most schools are doing that work and would welcome the support of a curriculum to point them in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd agree with Orleen. I mean, I think certainly some of the open meetings we've had colleagues from academies there, and I know that academies and free schools have, responded really appropriately to the Black Lives Matters movement this summer. There was a question, so I think we can't force them to take things on, and we rarely force our maintained schools to take things on, but we can encourage and influence and provide things for the head teachers, the governors, the staff members at all the schools in Hackney. There was a question about governors. Yeah, I think governor recruitment is really important, and I think there are different sorts of governors. As you know, the parent governors, I do think schools can work sometimes to provide additional training. We do that as well, to just encourage people to think about being governors who perhaps haven't thought about it before. And I know that schools where they've often been looking for those governors who aren't parent governors have deliberately sought to increase their diversity. So it's definitely something we would encourage.
Okay, I think we have, so Councillor Hanson, did you want to ask that question?
Well, it was just very much the same question as Councillor Peters about how much of this relates to academies, but I think we have just had the answer to that.
But also about, I suppose, about the hair policies, about whether our model policies will include things like hair.
Well, the slide said they would. It was the question was whether that would apply to academies.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add, please, that we have a head teacher steering group which has primary and secondary and special school heads maintained, and academies, and it also has senior leaders. So I don't think that there'll be heavy persuasion needed, because the commitment is there, and we saw that commitment in our YBM event the year before last, which was very well attended. Over kind of 113 different organisations were there, and 13 different local authorities. And now with the work that all is done on the curriculum, I think the appetite is very real if the schools are asking us questions, and in turn we've gone to them at the head teacher steering group meetings and at the head teacher meetings to announce this work, and they've responded with audits and with the commitment that is, well, it's really impressive. So we're not seeing resistance but it's not an easy ride in some schools because you know there's influence is needed to kind of narrow the in-school gap for that centre, but that commitment I think is very much there.
Thank you. I have a question from Councillor Gordon.
Yes, well, Anton's partly answered it. I mean, I was just, I mean, obviously, I'm sure that, I mean, I think I found the presentation about the curriculum, you know, absolutely fascinating. I'm sure that Pauline's a very persuasive advocate for it to schools. But I mean, obviously, schools, as we've heard earlier in the meeting, are going to be under a vast number of pressures to deliver, you know, a lot of very increasingly complex provision for children. So, I mean, I would be concerned, despite all the momentum behind this, that you know, there may well be other pressures that it's not going to work as well as we're hoping it's going to. I mean, I was just wondering whether there's anything more that we can do to advocate and promote this work that we're doing as a local authority. I mean, via Councillor Bramble's role in the LGA, and maybe even trying to, you know, influence government guidance, because it does sound like we've got, you know, the body of work that, you know, could be a model, I would hope, for other local authorities. So that's my second point. Was just briefly, I think, as well as the role of governors, I think we do need to look at how schools, school communities work, and how you know, families from different ethnicities interact with the school community, how sort of, you know, soft informal organisations like PTAs work, how welcoming and inclusive they are as well. So, I mean, not for the children and the whole family. I think there's, you know, there's quite a lot of different things going on with schools, how they intersect and how they include, you know, different groups. That's more a comment.
Anne?
It's a comment on, you know, whilst we can't instruct schools to do it, there's sort of that determined persuasion. And don't underestimate, and I'm not just saying this because we're here at Scrutiny, the impact of scrutinies holding us to account on these issues, feeding back down through schools, because it does make a significant difference. And I think we should also not forget the voice of young people, their response to killing of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. We know from discussions we've had with them has been very determined. They've driven a lot of the kind of political activity around there. And there's something about galvanizing that, you know, as an upward movement in schools, that they want, you know, they want to experience it in the curriculum, and they'll have a voice in that as well. So I know it's really difficult, you know, to keep us moving forward on this, but there's a lot of areas of work going on there that I think joined together make it almost impossible to turn this round.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if do we have any other questions? Councillor Potter, did you want to make that comment, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I was just worried about time for you, since it wasn't a specific question. You know, I just like to praise the work that's going on. I mean, I did say, you know, thanking children's services and education, but I think also I'd like to thank Councillor Bramble in particular, and also you, Councillor Conway, for your drive on these issues and the difference you are making. And, you know, we very much here as your supportive members to support the work that you are doing. So please come back to us and ask if we can help spread the message, you know, in any way, and support the work you are leading on.
Thank you very much.
That's me.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Potter.
And thank you. Chair, can I just say, Councillor Potter actually joined the roundtables with some third-party providers and teachers and parents, and came along and was part of that session. So I just want to thank her for input, a piece of work as well.
Thank you very much. So I think we're probably going to bring this item to a close now, but I think we need to have a think about what we want to do with this item going forward. And I think what stood out to me is the need potentially for us to have data in the children and Families biannual report, potentially on updating on the anti-racist action plan. I think that might be quite useful for us to, if there is a way that we can have a summary of that in the action plan, in the annual report and the biannual report. But I think it might be useful for us to just revisit this whole topic in 6 months, within 6 months, should I say, and just to ensure that we just keep that we continue to have our finger on the pulse with this one, and that we don't let it slide, and that we're able to continue to monitor the progress of the work, and to. Sorry, were you indicating, Louise, or are you saying bye? Okay. That's
saying bye. I'm
no
sorry.
worries. Okay. So unless anybody, I think I'm hopefully going to be meeting with Annie and Sarah soon, so I think we'll be able to have a conversation about how we can continue this conversation going forward. But I'd just like to thank everybody for coming along today, and Orleen for your presentation today. It's always nice to see another face at these meetings. So thank you very much for your contributions, and yeah, it's great work. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to the next item. Sorry, this is item 7, the work programme. So we originally had allocated 25 minutes for this item, but I think because we've overrun, we're instead going to try and cover this in 5. And anything that we're unable to cover in this meeting, we will cover in emails, if that's okay. So the Commission has consulted a wide range of stakeholders on the development of the work programme for the remainder of the municipal year to May 2021. Suggestions from local stakeholders, together with additional topics suggested in last year's work programme, have been used to develop the plan of work for 2021 and 2021. This is at page 19 of the agenda pack. To run through the planned, sorry, actually, Martin, shall I hand over to you? Did you want to run through the?
I mean, I could just very quickly just say what the key themes we'll be taking through, and lots of the issues we've kind of taken up already. So we've kind of dedicated space on the agenda to look at the attainment gap. We highlighted that in previous year, early on in the work programme. So we're looking at more detail about the attainment gap and how we can, what our strategies to improve that. We'll be looking at the performance of the SEN team, and our higher level kind of strategic overview of that as well. We wanted to kind of dedicate time to that, and the recovery plan. And we wanted to high level look at mental health issues as well. So like a strategic overview around the kind of policies, performance and strategies that just give us greater oversight of what's happening in terms of mental health as a view to maybe further scrutiny in years further down the work programme. What we've just highlighted as well at in the work programme at page, there we go, at page it is. We've highlighted a number of items where we didn't have space to look at them in the work programme. What we're going to do is to meet the representations officers from those services informally outside the meeting, just to get some sort of reconnaissance thing around local data and performance. And we'll report back to the Commission once we've had those meetings. So even though we don't have capacity in the work programme, and there's no kind of specific scrutiny objective, we're just doing this as a reconnaissance thing to keep up to date and awareness of those kind of main issues. So, but the main thing is, if there are issues within the work programme which members have particular interest in and want to kind of follow through, we can support further involvement. do let me know, and we can follow through and support further involvement from individual members on those kind of issues that we're kind of targeted through. But any questions or any suggestions in the work programme, then obviously email myself or Councillor Conway, and we can discuss them further.
Are we all happy with that? To email suggestions? Great. Okay. In which case,
yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, letters to cabinet members. Please, could you please turn to page 33 of the agenda pack? The Commission undertook 2 pieces of work in the 2019-20 from which it developed recommendations for Cabinet. The letters detailing a summary of the key findings together with the recommendations of the Commission are included in the agenda for members to note. Cabinet will consider and respond to the recommendations set out in these letters in due course. Moving on to item 9, the minutes. Can you please turn to page 49 of the agenda pack? Do we agree the minutes?
Agreed.
Fantastic. Okay. Item 10, any other business? As there is no other items of business, I would like to remind the Commission that the date of the next meeting is the 2nd of November 2020. Members of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission have been invited to attend Health in Hackney Scrutiny Commission on the 14th of October, where the integrated commissioning arrangements for children and young people and maternity services will be scrutinised. Members should have received an invite to this meeting. Have you all received an invite? Great. Thank you very much, and sorry for overrunning again. Thank you all for coming.
Well done, Chair. Really good meeting, Chair. Well done.